steals her heart.
You could just tell he had life together, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
But her marriage to Cy Ghosh turns into a crash course in criminal behavior.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved.
Police tell her, well, he hasn't done anything illegal yet. There's not much we can do.
And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
Amanda's life is on the line as she tries to shield her family from becoming his victims.
This behavior can't go on forever. Whether it's the victims or it's the perpetrator, something's got to give.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window.
Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
My mom and dad were married in Michigan and divorced when I was 2. So I really don't know my parents to have had a relationship together, but they were really good co-parents. And then when I turned probably around 12 or 13 years old, my mom graduated from X-ray school and we moved to Texas for work. I found myself being very alone in the beginning, especially through middle school. But we made it, and I don't think you could pay me to go back now. I graduated high school in '99, and I wanted to be a police officer. I'm not quite sure what motivated me to go down that route. I've always been kind of a square, never been a rule pusher or breaker, so it was just kind of a fit for me.
In 2002, 21-year-old Amanda Siggers is in her second year studying criminal justice at San Jacinto College in Houston, Texas.
I was a young girl that had the world at my fingertips, really. I was having a decent time with my friends, exploring the city and just living life. One day, a friend and I were preparing for a test, and we chose to go to a local bookstore, coffee shop, and study. We happened to look over, and there was this guy sitting at an adjacent table. He was very handsome. After a while, conversation ensued with him.
25-year-old Cy Ghosh tells Amanda and her friend that he works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, but intends to go back to school.
Cy had told me that he graduated from UT with a pre-med degree. He applied to get into Baylor College of Medicine, and he was accepted, but he denied the acceptance and ended up venturing into something else. He eventually got both of our phone numbers, and I thought for sure he was going to call her, but he ended up calling me. And I was ecstatic. The beginning of our relationship was very fun. Cy was very much a gentleman from the word go, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
He was very, very polite, very cordial, pretty much like Amanda had told me. He was a tall, handsome man, and I knew that she was, she was very smitten.
Culturally, he was very different from me. I found him to be very interesting. Even though he was raised here in the United States, he had a lot of Eastern values. His parents were first-generation Indians. I got to learn a lot about the temples and just the peaceful nature of Hinduism. It's such a beautiful culture. He told me that his father and mother were divorced, and prior to us getting together, he had moved out of his father's home and into his mother's home. He was very uncomfortable at his mother's house. She would consistently be on him, nagging him about something, mostly his career, because in that culture, career and education is number one. They generally live in the home for quite some time, even after college, in an effort to save as much money as possible. And so he was, staying in the house even at an older age because that's culturally just what was of the norm for them. Cy's mother's name is Lipika. She was very much about money, prestige. She didn't care for the union between Cy and I. He relayed that message to me, and I feel like she wanted him to marry an Indian woman and not a white woman. But we chose to look past it. 3 months later, she realized that he was serious about me because he actually brought me home, and we ended up staying the night there. and she opened up the door, and I was there. She shut the door very fast, and Cy had to go put that fire out. She was very vocal about me being a white bitch, and she didn't want that white bitch staying the night in her house. It was certainly a shock, but I knew that he wasn't going to listen to that. I knew how he felt about me, but it was very hurtful. We ended up leaving, and I don't believe I ever stayed the night there again.
Cy's dad, on the other hand, welcomes Amanda with open arms.
Cy's father, his name is Biz. I did not feel like he was racially against me or us being together. I felt like he genuinely wanted to see us succeed in life. He was just a very kind soul.
In late 2002, Biz asks his son and Amanda to come live with him and his current wife, Kay. He has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wants to spend his last days with his son.
The first few weeks were good. Kay was on board with everything. She knew that we were there to help and not to hinder. But then it started to decline. I could tell that there was tension between Kay and Cy. Cy went on to tell me that Kay would say false things about him. Eventually, it felt like I was walking on eggshells everywhere I went. One evening, Kay cornered me. She said, "You have no idea the person that you're getting involved with. You have no idea who he is, and I would highly encourage you to stay away." At the time, I thought, whatever, I'm in love, and he's so good to me, and he has nothing good to say about her, so it tainted my ability to really take her seriously.
Despite the tension, all three focus on caring for Biz. Until his death in July of 2003, Cy is inconsolable.
He was devastated. Biz was a primary force in his life, and once he passed, I think that Cy felt empty. I think he felt scared. Very different, mentally very different.
Things come to a head when Amanda finds something suspicious in Cy's car.
I found a box of condoms, and it prompted a lot of questions. He became defensive, and it led to a horrific argument, and I started to get a little bit scared. And I had attempted to make a phone call, and he ripped the phone out of the wall. So I made my way to the front door, and I pushed the panic button on the alarm, which immediately sends a call to 911. So I knew that they were on the way, and he knew they were on the way as well, and he left. So the police showed up, and I let them know what had transpired. I did not press charges. It was hours later that he came back, and I vividly remember just being so upset that he was gone, not knowing what was going to transpire, if we were breaking up.
Cy begs Amanda's forgiveness, and Amanda rationalizes that he is deeply grieving and not acting like himself.
I forgave him, and we just chose to ultimately put it behind us. I had a lot of big hopes for our relationship, and I wanted things to be normal again. So I just made it okay. And we were fine. We were fine after that.
In 2005, Amanda and Cy decide to take the next big step.
I was very happy for my daughter to get married. She was very happy about getting married.
And by this time, Cy's mom has accepted Amanda into her son's life.
So we had a Hindu ceremony at the Meenakshi temple, and 2 days later we had the Christian ceremony. My family came to the Hindu ceremony. I had to wear a red sari, red and gold. It was absolutely beautiful.
The highlight was when I saw them walking towards the limousine to spend the rest of their lives together. That's the way it was supposed to work.
I felt like my dreams were coming true. We were in forward motion.
Cy applies to medical school, and life seems on track. Until he does an about-face and pressures Amanda to change her career.
It came out of left field for sure. He was very adamant that being a police officer, that was a blue-collar job. It wasn't acceptable to him or his family, and he made it very clear that it was not where he saw his life going.
Instead, he wants her to go into healthcare as well.
I was to go through nursing school, and we were going to open and run a practice together. In theory, it was the fairy tale. I caved in because I felt like he knew better than I did. He was 5 years older than me, and he had a plan.
Cy chooses a podiatry school in Des Moines, Iowa, and Amanda gets accepted into a nearby nursing school.
When they moved to Iowa, they were about 10 hours closer to Michigan, I think, so I could see them more often. I would take the train over, help her decorate, and I loved doing it. As a father, it was great for me to be able to do that.
But Amanda doesn't adapt well to her new field of study.
Well, I was in a clinical setting one day, and I ended up passing out. And that's when my professor pulled me to the side and said, you know, you may want to rethink your career choice.
She said, Dad, I really want to do it. But she knew that she couldn't do it because she couldn't stay on the side of blood, so.
Amanda decides to withdraw from the program.
When I told Cy, he didn't react well. He made it very clear that he was embarrassed by my decision. He told me he was very disappointed and that I needed to do it. I stood my ground, that I wanted to do something else. And ultimately, he had called me white trash and bitch and wished that I was dead. That's when I realized that I had made a mistake.
When Amanda Ghosh quits nursing school, her husband Cy becomes verbally abusive.
But I'm a loyal soul. I'm very loyal to my mate. And I chose to stay. I didn't think that there wasn't anything that we couldn't fix. I took my vows, my marriage vows, very seriously.
Amanda forges ahead despite Cy's disapproval.
I took all of my criminal justice and nursing courses and wrapped it into a general studies degree, basically the highest level associate degree you can get from a junior college, and I moved on. But I didn't feel proud of that accomplishment, actually. Cy belittled me because it wasn't good enough, and so I felt like a failure.
And I felt that there was things going on that I didn't know about, which relayed into their marriage some friction.
He definitely made me feel devalued. I felt alone. I felt isolated. I missed my family.
And then, a call from out of the blue brings family directly into Amanda's life in an unexpected way.
Amber was my half-sister. She was born to my dad and my stepmom, Joyce. She was 4 years younger than me, almost to the day. The only sister I've ever had. And as she got older, she became dependent on drugs. We went our separate ways.
While struggling with addiction, 21-year-old Amber gives birth to a baby girl, Kelsey. When Kelsey is a few months old, Amber is ordered by a Michigan judge to enter rehab for 90 days.
The paternity had not been established on Kelsey. And I received a phone call from CPS asking me if I would be interested in doing a temporary foster placement for my niece. It was a no-brainer for me, but I wanted to make sure it was okay with Cy to bring her into the home, and he agreed.
In January of 2007, Amanda travels to Michigan to get her niece.
When I first saw Kelsey, she was only 11 pounds at 7 months old. I knew instantly that I was never going to give her back.
Amber was not capable of taking care of a child, but Amanda was, so I was happy that Kelsey was in a safe place.
I knew that I was on the path that God had laid out for me. She was a sickly baby due to being born addicted. She cried incessantly. It is very hard to deal with a baby that never stops crying, but somehow you figure out how to deal with it.
Amber didn't finish her rehabilitation, so the court awarded Amanda to keep taking care of Kelsey.
Even though he never said it, I think Cy felt like he had made a mistake. I think he quickly realized that the responsibility of a child was far more than he anticipated. Unfortunately, it wore Cy down over time. I was doing the laundry one day and the baby was crying. I walked around the corner and he was shaking her violently. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that he was doing what he was doing to such a tiny, fragile little baby. I was just blown away. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to leave. He has absolutely crossed the line. I need to get her out of there. He didn't deserve the title of being a dad.
In May 2007, Amanda moves back to Houston with Kelsey, leaving Cy behind in Iowa.
I was gonna take care of this baby. That was my mission. Why the career choices that I had made and why it didn't pan out. I knew that I was supposed to be Kelsey's mom. I was able to find a townhouse apartment right next door to my mom, which was extremely helpful because she was able to help me with the baby. I got a part-time job so that we could survive. Somehow we made it work. All of a sudden I became a single mom. We were divorced in December of 2008. He filed for divorce and it was uncontested. It was easy, 2-page divorce. I felt like it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me at the same time. It was such a weird feeling.
Amanda enrolls in a sonography program for training in ultrasound.
I felt very confident. I found my independence. I was going to school and I was working full-time. Kelsey was going to daycare and thriving in daycare. We were happy. I was free of all of the dysfunction that I had lived in for so long.
But Amanda's newfound peace will not last for long.
So I moved back to Texas in December of 2009, early 2010. And that's when the stalking began.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved. This behavior can't go on forever. When is somebody gonna break?
Amanda Harris has moved on with her life, while Cy flounders.
Ironically enough, he decided that medical school wasn't quite right for him.
Cy drops out of podiatry, converts to Christianity, and returns to Houston.
One day he called me and told me that he had obtained a job at a pizza place near my apartment. And I thought, why in the world would he take a job delivering pizzas? And then it dawned on me that he could drive in and out of my apartment complex on the daily, on the hourly sometimes. I found it to be bizarre behavior.
He's a pizza delivery driver. Where being a law enforcement officer wasn't good enough for her, now he's going to drive and deliver pizzas, not because he wants to, but because it allows him to have the freedom to drive by and check on her whenever he wants to.
In early 2011, 2.5 years after her divorce, Amanda moves to a new home in a new neighborhood and doesn't share her address with Cy. It's a new beginning.
I was encouraged by my friends to get out there, so I put my profile up on an online dating site and I met Wayne.
Wayne Harris works in the motorsports industry and, like Amanda, is divorced with one child, a boy named Nick.
So I met up with him and he thought he was an attractive man and our conversations just flowed so well. I just knew right away. I was so ecstatic to feel this feeling again, to know that I was capable of feeling, you know, the joy, the butterflies again. And he was as well, that we just didn't miss a beat. We decided that we were gonna see each other the very next day, which turned into the very next day and every day thereafter, unless he was out of town for work.
And I thought he's just a fantastic guy. Real nice to be around, very energetic.
So Super Bowl Sunday rolled around, and Wayne came over that evening, and I was cooking, and I would oftentimes let Kelsey play at the park right there because I could see her. She's basically within arm's reach of me. So Kelsey's playing, Wayne and I are talking, and I get a knock at the door, and it's the police officer that lives on site. He had received a call from a concerned person letting them know that I let my child play outside unattended.
Amanda invites the officer inside to discuss it, embarrassed that her new boyfriend is a witness.
We all had conversation. Wayne had conversation with him. We were all in agreement that she was certainly within an eye shot, ear shot, arm shot of me, and that she was perfectly fine. I asked the officer who had made the call, and he couldn't tell me, but I knew in my gut who was at the root of this. I felt frustrated. I felt violated again. It's a very uneasy feeling to know you're being watched. At this point, my relationship is blossoming with Wayne, and I didn't let him know everything that was going on because I certainly didn't want to taint a good relationship with my baggage and drama. I didn't want to bring that into the relationship.
Amanda's strategy is to block Cy completely.
I figured he didn't get his way. Hopefully he'll move on now, but that never happened. And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
It has been 5 years since Amanda took custody of Kelsey. Now, as Amanda is on the verge of becoming Kelsey's legal mother, Cy starts to stir things up.
What he did is he cleverly went to a therapist, told the therapist all of his grievance toward me, and made me out to look like a neglectful mother. And it was her duty to call CPS by state law. I received a phone call from CPS that they were going to interview my daughter that day. I felt mortified, and as soon as she stepped foot in my door, she realized quickly that Kelsey was just fine.
I just couldn't believe that he did that. It was like, when does it stop?
Kelsey, the adopted daughter, is the reason she left him in the first place. So by calling CPS, if that worker had not done a thorough and proper investigation or had just rushed to judgment, then Amanda could have very easily lost Kelsey. And for all intents and purposes, her niece, who is now her daughter, is the most important thing she has. And it would have been devastating.
Concerned that Cy's unpredictable behavior is escalating, Amanda seeks help from the local police.
I don't think it's ever going to go away, and I honestly have no idea how to deal with it. I've gone to the police department at this point. I've talked to officers that have asked me to just ignore it, and as long as he doesn't put his hands on me, there's really nothing they can do. It's very frustrating. I felt horribly harassed, unprotected, and you feel so helpless.
Wayne steps up and asks Amanda and Kelsey to move in with him on the other side of Houston.
It was the best feeling. I felt Kelsey was going to have a great role model, a great father figure. Moving to the north side of town was good because I didn't know where I had gone. And so the stalking had come to a halt for a short period of time. Life was actually going really, really well.
It was very, very comforting to know that she was with somebody that was safe, and Kelsey too.
That all changes one night when Wayne is away on business.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window. I knew he was out there.
In 2012, in the Houston suburb of Tomball, Amanda Ghosh is awakened by gunshots outside her window.
I immediately called the police.
She did not see Cy shoot the gun, but she did see him get in the car. When that happened, well, that's when I really became concerned.
When they showed up, he wasn't there. They checked the perimeter of the home. They didn't find any shell casings. They spoke with the neighbors. None of the neighbors had heard any gunshots, and so I kind of felt like they didn't believe me, and it really went nowhere.
Amanda is on high alert, and it's not long before another incident occurs.
One night, Wayne and I were sitting in the living room watching TV, and our dog ran to the window and was barking his tail off. So I knew somebody was out there, and I had a feeling that it was Cy. Wayne hopped up quite angrily, and I encouraged him to just settle down for half a second, let me call the police and get them there this time so that they could witness what was going on. They were right around the corner, so it only took a couple of minutes, and they caught him there. Thank God. This time he had finally been caught, and they issued him a trespass violation and a warning. We actually felt good after that for a while. We didn't see him for quite some time after that.
With Cy in her rear view, Amanda commits to her bright future.
We decided to get married on 12/12/12 at 12/12 at the Justice of the Peace.
They were very, very happy. And in fact, at the time that they got married, they adopted Kelsey at the same time.
I had been fighting for custody of Kelsey for the better part of 7 years. It was quite the process, but we'd finally gotten there. And then 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant for Gemma.
It was great to see. Wayne wrote notes for the unborn baby for her to read later on and, when she grows up. So he was very, very excited about being a new father.
Gemma was born with a very, very rare condition called bacterial association. She was born with only one kidney, as well as no esophagus, a cardiac defect, and a vertebral defect. Needless to say, she required 24/7 attention, care.
She was a perfect little child. Of course, all of my grandkids were perfect. They are a blessing.
About 1.5 years after Gemma was born, we moved into this beautiful home that neither one of us thought we would ever be able to live in. And here we achieved it. We were on top of the world at this point. Christmas Day 2015, we woke up rather early with the kiddos because they were just super excited. And we just sat down to open our gifts, and I hear a tap at the door. And who else but Cy?
Cy tells Amanda that he would like to pray with her and her 2 daughters.
I just couldn't believe that he even came back around, especially at a time when a family's getting together for Christmas.
Wayne came unglued that day. He escorted Cy off of our property with a lot of profanity and a lot of anger and aggression.
Cy's stalking has been going on for almost 6 years, ever since Amanda decided to leave him.
There are some individuals who cannot take no for an answer. They cannot move on and regain their sense of balance until they're back in control again. Maybe if Amanda were to run back to him and he could say, "No, I don't want you," then he would have control again and he could move on. Right now, none of the decisions are his, except the ones that he uses to torture and drive them crazy.
She is aware of Texas's strong stand your ground laws and asks the police for more information about self-defense.
So I asked the officer what my rights were. If I had the right to hold him at citizen's arrest until the police got there. He told me that we definitely had that right.
Wayne owns a gun and suggests Amanda buy one too.
Wayne encouraged me to go get my license to carry and buy a weapon to protect myself due to all of this incessant harassment, stalking. So I took a few classes and tried to become as capable with my weapon as possible. June 28th, 2017 was Kelsey's 11th birthday, and she chose to just have a she day. She chose to do all kinds of things like get her nails done, get her hair done, very girly stuff.
Amanda, Kelsey, and Kelsey's friend Georgia meet up with Wayne, his son Nick, and baby Gemma at Kelsey's favorite restaurant.
And after dinner, Gemma was exhausted, so I asked Wayne to take her back home so that I could finish shopping with Kelsey and her friend for her birthday. So he obliged and reached over and gave me a kiss, a really long kiss. The kids were in the background ewing. I'll forever remember it. I stayed at the mall with Georgia and Kelsey for probably about another hour. Kelsey asked me if her friend could stay the night, and I said sure. So all three of us went back to our home. And as I was rounding the corner of my street, I saw Cy on his hands and knees at my front door with Wayne pointing a gun at him. I knew immediately that I needed to protect my family. I reached into my glove box, I grabbed my gun, and I told the girls to sit down and not to move. I got out of the car, I held the gun in that direction, and I called the police.
Hi, I need a police officer as soon as possible. I'm
Hold on.
arrest right now.
You can't make a citizen's arrest.
Yes, I've already been informed that I can. I have an ongoing case against this person.
Ma'am.
Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
On June 28, 2017, Jennifer Provoznik is visiting friends who live down the street from where Amanda and Wayne live.
I work in law enforcement, and it's my day off, so I just wanted to really enjoy my day with my friends.
They are oblivious to the scene unfolding a couple of yards away.
My name is Amanda Harris. I've been down there many times to tell you guys what's going on. He's been told by the police to stay away hundreds of times.
Do you have a weapon right now?
My husband and I both have a weapon.
Okay, I'm going to need you to put that weapon up, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, you and your husband both.
Wayne, he wants you to put your weapon down.
Does this other male have a weapon?
I have no idea.
From inside the car, 11-year-old Kelsey also calls 911.
Send him over right now, please.
What's going on?
My mom's ex-husband, he literally stalks us and he's at our house right now. My parents are yelling at him right now with guns. I'm sorry. I'm just really scared.
Sorry, I'm getting out of you. Stay
Oh my God.
And I hear 3 distinct gunshots and a woman screaming. So at this time, my training kicks in, and I told my friend, I was like, listen, call 911, I'm going down there.
I had been shot, but I didn't know it. It was all so surreal. I saw my husband fall to the ground out of the corner of my eye. And as I sat up from the position I was in, I was shot again. And I was laying between the 2 cars when I saw Cy's feet moving around the car and circle back to me. And when I looked up, he was holding a gun at my head, and he pulled the trigger. But it didn't fire. I had been saved by the grace of God. It didn't fire. And some divine force picked me up, and I got to my feet and I ran for my life.
I see a woman running into the house and slamming the door. And then there's this guy just standing there in between 2 cars, looking around, and he looks right at me and then takes off running.
Cy Ghosh gets in a car and flees the scene.
And that's when a little girl gets out of the car. She looks at me and she starts screaming, "Save my daddy." And I look down, there's a body in the driveway. And I was like, listen, I said, there's a woman behind me. You take your friend. You do not stop till you get to her. Do you understand me? And she goes, yes. And so I sent her off at that point. I look at the individual on the ground, and I knew there was no point of me even attempting CPR or any other life-saving matters.
All I could think is he's gonna fire through this door. And I realized in that moment that I had left Kelsey in the back seat of the car. I ran back out the front door, and I was met by a very
kind lady. I know that she's wounded and she's also in shock. She's yelling about her babies being missing. She's also screaming, I knew he would do something like this. I knew it. And then she notices the man in the driveway.
She kindly grabbed me by my arm. That's when I realized I'd been shot in my arm. And she walked me over to his body. And I was able to say goodbye to my husband. And they were putting me in an ambulance shortly thereafter.
When police arrive, they find 5-year-old Gemma and 17-year-old Nick hiding in a closet. That's when Amanda's father drops by on his way home to say happy birthday to Kelsey.
As I got out of the car, there was 3 or 4 policemen that came up to me. And the first thing they said was, Amanda's in the hospital, but she's okay. She's been shot, but she's gonna be okay. And right at that point, that's when my heart just fell. And the first thing I thought of was the kids. Are the kids okay? What happened? And they said, yeah, the kids are here. They're with some of the neighbors that are here. And then I said, well, what about Wayne? That's when they continued to tell me he didn't make it.
We begin with that breaking news alert out of League City. A man police initially wanted for questioning is now wanted for murder.
We were the first news crew on the scene. We're getting there, and it's the chaos of the scene because you have a gunman on the run, you have dead body and someone seriously wounded, and everyone's trying to figure out what happened.
They put the hospital on lockdown because Cy was on the run.
I was, at her bedside the whole time. I don't know, it's like a movie, a bad movie. It was a horrible nightmare.
So as this statewide manhunt is going on, police had reason to believe that Cy was going to try to run for the border. And it was a checkpoint in El Paso. They were able to identify that Cy was trying to cross. There wasn't much of a resistance. At that point, even Cy had figured out that this was over and he was going to be taken into custody. When they look inside the vehicle, they do find a gun. They find several clips with bullets inside where the casings match the 12 that were found on scene of the shooting back in Lake City.
I don't know how I made it through. I really don't. But I have children and they needed me and life didn't stop. I had to get out of bed every day. I had to accept that he was never coming back. Thank God for my children. I stayed in the house until the trial came, and it took us 2 years to go to trial.
As the family tries to heal, Amanda assumes the only time she will ever have to encounter Cy again is in court. But she is wrong.
Well, one day I get this phone call, and I can clearly see that it's the jail on my caller ID. So I turn on the voice recorder, and I took the phone call.
Hello?
Hello?
I just want to apologize to you. I'm sorry for everything, Amanda. I'm really sorry.
Is this a joke?
No, I just want to apologize.
You almost killed me. Is this a joke?
No, Amanda, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got scared.
Got scared?
I could not believe that I was listening to this person on the other end of the phone. How is this even allowed? Who is running this jail and allowing a murderer to call his victim?
I just want to pray with you guys. I'll put you on the phone real quick before we go to trial. Can I pray with you? Please, Jesus, please comfort Amanda. Please help me never harm her, never to cause her problems again.
Cy's staggering ability to keep harassing Amanda will even continue through the trial itself.
So I was charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and stalking.
In the middle of the case, Cy fires his defense attorney and decides he's going to defend himself now.
But I know that he wanted to get me on the stand and question me, and that was his way of doing it. He was able to question me for a very long period of time.
Cy thought that Amanda was going to wilt on the stand. That's not what happened.
Amanda comes through this a hero. The fact that she does not cave, that she looks him straight in the eye and answers his questions. So if he wanted control, he didn't get it. He got to talk to her, but he didn't get the responses, the feeling, the control that he was seeking. So in that case, Amanda comes out a winner.
I don't know how the law allows your attacker to question you. How is that even possible? But it happened.
After the trial wraps up, the jury is quick to return guilty verdicts. And on March 5th, 2020, Cy is sentenced to 50 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years.
I was disappointed because I feel like he should have gotten life without the possibility of parole. I truly believe that if he were to walk the streets again, if he were to ever get out, that he will kill me. He will finish the job.
I hope he never gets out, and all I can do is just say, let Jesus take the wheel. Even though I'm that close to her, I can't imagine going through what she went through. But we get through it every day. It's a process where we're all working through it.
I was angry with the police. I feel like they failed my family, and I think Cy Ghosh is pure evil. But there's still a big life to live, and I choose to just be happy. We have what, 40? I have 40 summers left. I'm gonna make the best of the 40 summers I have left. Wayne wouldn't want me to waste them.
At 2:17 a.m., a patrol car rolled past a stretch of highway outside Waco, where the dark seemed thicker than usual, the kind of dark that absorbs headlights instead of reflecting them, and somewhere beyond the tree line a dog barked once, and then went quiet, as if it knew better, because this was the night that would refuse to stay buried, the night that would crawl back into the present 2 decades later and demand to be seen again. In the spring of 2001, Texas was loud with growth and optimism, but this patch of road was silent, and silence was the first witness to what happened here. A sedan was found abandoned on the shoulder, engine cold, driver's door ajar, purse still on the seat, keys gone, and the absence of a body screamed louder than any siren could. The name would come later, the face would fill the evening news, but in that first moment there was only a question hanging in the air, heavy and unanswered, and it would not leave for years. She was 26, worked 2 jobs, and was known for showing up early and leaving late, a woman whose routines were so predictable that her failure to arrive triggered alarms before dawn. Friends said she hated surprises, that she planned weeks ahead, that she never took this road unless she had to. Neighbors remembered the car, the color, the way it always parked in the same spot, and the way it wasn't there that morning. Police logged the call as a missing person, then upgraded it within hours when they saw the vehicle, the scuffed paint near the rear bumper, the faint smell of gasoline that didn't belong. A cold case does not begin cold. It begins hot, frantic, desperate, with phones ringing and doors opening and officers walking the same 100 yards over and over, hoping the ground will change its mind and offer something new. The scene yielded fragments that refused to speak. A footprint in damp soil that could have been anyone's. A fiber on the seat that matched nothing in the databases of the time. No blood, no weapon, no struggle obvious enough to anchor a narrative. The media arrived with their lights and their language. Missing woman, mysterious disappearance, community on edge. Texas knows how to process tragedy in public, and the town did what it always does. Candlelight vigils, prayer circles, flyers taped to grocery store windows, faces peering out from black and white photocopies that promised a reward and begged for a call. Every tip sounded urgent. Every lead fizzled. The road kept it secret. Investigators traced her last known movements through receipts and timestamps, a gas station camera that caught her silhouette but not her eyes, a cashier who remembered nothing unusual except the rain, light but steady, turning dust into mud and erasing edges. She had planned to meet someone, then canceled. She had argued with someone, then reconciled. She remembered to lock her apartment, then forgot to take her jacket. The facts stacked up without forming a picture. In the weeks that followed, the case hardened, layers forming as theories competed for oxygen. Voluntary disappearance. Abduction by a stranger. A crime of passion. Each theory found a champion and a critic. None could be proven. The community felt watched. Parents drove carpools tighter. Bars closed earlier. The highway took on a reputation, a place where headlights seemed to dim and radios crackled. The word cold case was whispered long before it was written, because everyone could feel the temperature dropping as days turned into months, and the file thickened without moving forward. Detectives changed shifts. A lead detective retired. Evidence was boxed and labeled and moved to storage, where it would sit beneath fluorescent lights that hummed like insects, waiting for a future that didn't yet exist. Years passed, and time did what it always does to memory. It softened faces and sharpened fear. Her family marked birthdays with empty chairs. They learned the vocabulary of grief and procedure, learned how to ask without begging, learned how to listen for updates that never came. Every few months, a rumor would ripple through town. A supposed sighting in another county, a jailhouse confession that collapsed under scrutiny, a psychic's map that pointed everywhere and nowhere. The case was not forgotten. It was preserved in amber, a story everyone knew and no one could finish. Then technology crept forward, quiet and relentless. Databases grew. Old evidence gained new value. A fiber once dismissed became a question again. A partial print found a cousin. A sample too small to matter in 2001 suddenly mattered a great deal. Detectives reopened the box not because they were hopeful, but because they were stubborn, because cold cases are magnets for unfinished business, because the silence of that road still felt wrong. They re-interviewed witnesses who were older now, who remembered different details, whose certainties had shifted with time. They mapped cell towers that barely existed back then. They followed money that had long since changed hands. And then, in a moment that no one would later describe as cinematic, a name surfaced. Not a stranger, not a drifter. Someone who had been nearby all along, someone who had offered help, who had blended into the background noise of the investigation. The arrest came early in the morning, as arrests often do, with the quiet efficiency of paperwork catching up to a life. Handcuffs clicked. A door closed. Cameras arrived too late to capture the first look on his face, but neighbors filled in the blanks with speculation. The headline wrote itself. Texas, 2001 cold case solved. Arrest shocks victim's family. Shock is not closure. Shock is the body reacting before the mind has time to argue. The family stood before microphones and tried to reconcile relief with confusion, gratitude with anger, because the story they had lived with for years had just been rewritten without their consent. Investigators spoke carefully, emphasizing evidence, process, patience. They said the right words. They avoided the wrong ones. They did not say what everyone else was thinking, that solving a cold case does not thaw the past, it only rearranges it. Questions multiplied. Why now? Why him? Why did it take so long? The defense promised answers of a different kind. The town split along familiar lines, believers and skeptics, those who trusted the science and those who trusted their gut, those who remembered the suspect as helpful, quiet, normal. Cold cases carry a special kind of violence because they ask people to doubt their own memories, to accept that the ordinary can hide the monstrous, that the truth can sit in plain sight and still remain invisible. As the legal process crept forward, details leaked and then were corrected, timelines shifted by minutes that felt like miles, and the highway outside Waco returned to the news cycle, its name spoken with a shiver. Reporters stood where the car had been found and described the darkness as if it were a character, as if it had agency, as if it had chosen this place and this woman and this night. The dog barked again, in someone's recollection, and went quiet. The community listened. But even with an arrest, even with a confident press conference, the case refused to settle. There were gaps that did not close, questions that circled back on themselves, a sense that something essential remained just out of reach. Cold cases solved can still feel unsolved because truth is not a single object you can hold up to the light. It is a set of shadows that move when you move. The family learned this quickly. Relief did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, interrupted by doubt. 20 years after that first patrol car passed through the dark, the road looks the same. The trees have grown. The asphalt has been patched. Cars still slow at the bend without knowing why. Somewhere in storage, evidence bags bear dates written in a hand that has long since retired. Somewhere in a courtroom, a narrative is being assembled piece by piece, each piece argued over, each piece heavy with consequence. And somewhere between the certainty of an arrest and the persistence of unanswered questions, the case breathes, not cold anymore, but not at rest either. A reminder that some nights do not end when the sun comes up, they just wait. The arrest did not quiet the town. It tuned it to a higher pitch, a frequency where every sound felt amplified, where the scrape of chairs in the courthouse hallway sounded like a verdict and the click of a reporter's pen carried the weight of accusation. In the days that followed, the name of the suspect traveled faster than the facts, leaping from porch to porch, from radio to diner counter, accompanied by the unsettling realization that this was a man people thought they knew. He had lived within the radius of the search grid. He had been interviewed early on. He had nodded at the right moments, said the right words, and walked away clean enough to pass through 20 years without leaving a mark that stuck. That is the cruelty of time in a cold case. It grants cover. Investigators return to their notes with a different posture now, reading old statements not as possibilities but as prefaces, listening for the cadence of evasion where once there had seemed only cooperation. A phrase repeated too often. A time window framed too precisely. A helpfulness that bordered on rehearsed. None of it was proof on its own. Together, it formed a pattern that had been invisible when the case was new and urgent, and everyone was speaking at once. The suspect had been near the highway that night. He had reason to be. He always did. Work schedules, favors for friends, errands that made sense until you stacked them side by side, and noticed the overlaps. The evidence that anchored the arrest was not dramatic. It did not look like justice on television. It was a convergence, a partial genetic profile teased from material long considered inert, a match that did not scream but whispered insistently until the database answered back. It was the kind of science that works best when no one is watching, when patience outpaces doubt. The lab reports arrived in envelopes that bent slightly at the corners, the paper inside dense with numbers and confidence intervals. Prosecutors would later explain it carefully, knowing how easily certainty can sound like arrogance. Defense attorneys would explain it differently, knowing how easily complexity can sound like reasonable doubt. The family sat with the news in a small room that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, listening to explanations they had learned to absorb without interrupting. They asked the questions they had practiced asking, the ones that kept them upright. Where was she? What happened that night? Would there be answers now? The answers came in cautious verbs and conditional clauses. Investigators said they believed. They said they were confident. They said the process would take time. Time had already taken everything it was going to take. Outside, the cameras waited for tears or triumph. They got neither. Shock flattens expression. It drains color. It turns the future into a narrow hallway where each step feels provisional. The family walked past the microphones with the discipline of people who had been rehearsing grief for decades, and the crowd interpreted their restraint according to its own needs. Some called it strength. Some called it doubt. Both were wrong. It was survival. As the case moved toward court, the story hardened into talking points. The prosecution emphasized the long arc of justice, the idea that patience, properly applied, can outlast concealment. The defense emphasized contamination, coincidence, the dangers of revisiting evidence through modern lenses that can distort as much as they clarify. Experts lined up on both sides, their credentials recited like talismans. Each promised illumination. Each delivered shadows. The highway returned to the narrative as if it were a witness with a memory. Engineers testified about sight lines and shoulders, about how easy it would have been to stop a car there without being seen. Former patrol officers spoke about response times and radio coverage in 2001 about dead zones where calls dropped and help arrived late. A meteorologist described the rain, light but persistent, enough to blur tracks and smudge timelines. None of it contradicted the others. None of it resolved the central absence. Witnesses from the past were summoned back into the present. Some arrived with certainty sharpened by repetition, others with humility born of forgetting. One recalled headlights in the distance, another a voice raised and then lowered. A gas station cashier testified again. Older now, the memory of that night softened into a feeling rather than a sequence. The defense pressed on inconsistencies. The prosecution reframed them as the natural erosion of time. Jurors watched closely, learning to read faces for conviction or doubt, knowing that either could be misleading. The suspect sat at the defense table with a posture that suggested endurance. He listened. He took notes. He avoided the family's eyes. When he spoke to his attorney, he leaned in close, the whispering too private to interpret. His past was dissected in public, routines mapped and habits weighed. Friends came forward to say he was kind, reliable, the last person they would suspect. Others admitted to moments they had dismissed, a temper here, a fixation there, nothing criminal, nothing definitive. Ordinary life, examined under a microscope, yields patterns everywhere. The word cold case echoed through the proceedings like a refrain. It carried authority and accusation in equal measure. It reminded everyone that this was not a fresh wound but a scar reopened, that the rules of engagement had changed since 2001. Digital footprints replaced paper trails. Science replaced intuition. And yet intuition refused to leave the room. Jurors felt it tugging at them, the ancient instinct to assemble stories from fragments, to seek coherence where the record offered only proximity. Outside the courthouse, the town negotiated its own verdict in real time. Yard signs appeared, some calling for justice, others urging caution. Talk radio hosts framed the case as proof of perseverance or proof of overreach, depending on the hour. The highway acquired a temporary memorial again, flowers wired to a fence that had rusted and been repaired and rusted again. Drivers slowed. They stared. They told themselves they were paying respect, but they were also looking for themselves in the story, checking their own routines against the possibility of sudden disappearance. The family returned home each night to rooms that held too many memories and not enough answers. They watched the coverage they pretended not to watch. They learned new terms, stochastic effects, transfer, secondary deposition. They learned how easily a narrative can outrun a fact. The arrest had promised an ending. What it delivered was a prolonged middle. In private moments, doubts surfaced not as accusations, but as questions that refused to stay quiet. If this was the man, why did certain details still resist alignment? If this was the moment justice arrived, why did it feel so unfinished? Investigators heard these doubts and bristled, then softened. They had lived with the case long enough to recognize its personality, the way it resisted clean lines. They believed in the evidence. They also believed in humility. As weeks turned into months, the courtroom became a place where time folded in on itself. 2001 and the present coexisted in testimony and exhibits, in maps that layered old roads over new ones, in photographs whose graininess marked their age. The jury was asked to travel back without nostalgia, to see the past as it was, not as it had been retold. It was an impossible request. Everyone carries their own edits. The night of the disappearance replayed endlessly, a loop that refused to degrade. A decision to take that road. A stop that lasted seconds or minutes. A door opening. A moment when the ordinary tipped into the irreversible. The prosecution argued that the suspect was there, that opportunity and evidence converged. The defense argued that convergence is not causation, that the story remained circumstantial. Both were persuasive. Both could be true. When the court recessed, the hallway filled with whispers again, the same questions, sharpened now by proximity to consequence. Solved, some said, pointing to the arrest as if it were a period at the end of a sentence. Not solved, others replied, pointing to the spaces between the words. Cold cases do not like periods. They prefer commas, pauses that invite continuation. And through it all, the road outside Waco remained unchanged, absorbing rain and sunlight with equal indifference, carrying traffic that did not know it was part of a story still being written. The dog barked again in someone's memory and went quiet. The case moved forward on paper in courtrooms and labs and arguments. In the town, it lingered, a low hum beneath daily life, reminding everyone that even when an arrest arrives, the past does not always surrender its grip. By the third week of testimony, the courtroom air felt recycled, as if every breath had already been taken once before, and the story of that night in 2001 had been told so many times it risked becoming familiar, which is the most dangerous thing a mystery can become. Familiarity breeds shortcuts. Shortcuts breed certainty. And certainty, when it arrives too early, can be just another form of blindness. The judge reminded the jury to keep open minds, and the words landed with a dull thud of ritual, but they mattered, because this case demanded vigilance, not against lies, but against the comfort of a story that finally seemed to fit. The prosecution pivoted now, away from the highway and toward motive, a word that promises explanation even when it delivers speculation. They spoke of proximity, of opportunity, of a relationship that had never been officially documented but had left traces in phone logs and casual sightings. Not a lover in the cinematic sense, not an enemy in the obvious one, but a familiar presence whose access went unquestioned. Someone who knew her schedule well enough to anticipate it. Someone who knew which road she would take when she was tired. The suggestion was subtle, almost reluctant, as if the prosecutors understood how easily motive can curdle into character assassination. They let the evidence speak, or tried to. Call records from 2001 flickered onto a screen, primitive by modern standards, the data grainy and incomplete. Numbers without names. Gaps where calls should have been. A brief connection near the time of disappearance, routed through a tower that covered the highway. The defense objected, then withdrew, then objected again, threading the needle between relevance and inference. The jury watched the timestamps, the minutes ticking by like a metronome, wondering how much weight a single call could carry after so many years. Technology, the prosecution argued, does not forget. The defense countered that it forgets constantly, that absence of data is not presence of guilt. Then came the witnesses who had not been called in 2001 because they had not known they were witnesses yet. A former coworker who remembered a conversation in the weeks before the disappearance, a remark that had seemed trivial at the time and sinister only in retrospect. A neighbor who recalled a car idling late at night, the engine sound different somehow, lower, rougher. Memory is a living thing. It changes when it is observed. The court acknowledged this without saying it aloud, weighing each recollection not for its drama, but for its consistency. Consistency is a fragile currency. The defense shifted tactics, turning the lens outward to the investigation itself. They mapped the early days, the frantic hours when leads flooded in and resources stretched thin. They highlighted missed opportunities, witnesses not followed up on, evidence logged but not prioritized. They spoke of tunnel vision, the human tendency to latch onto a theory and see everything through it. The implication was clear without being stated. If mistakes were made then, how could confidence be justified now? The prosecution bristled, reminding the court that hindsight is a generous critic. The jury absorbed both arguments, feeling the tug of each. A former detective took the stand, retired, his hair white now, his voice steady. He described the limitations of the time, the lack of digital tools, the reliance on intuition and legwork. He did not apologize. He did not defend. He explained. He spoke of nights spent driving that highway, of knocking on doors until porch lights went dark, of the weight of a case that refuses to yield. When asked about the suspect, he paused longer than necessary, a silence that drew attention to itself. He said the man had been cooperative. He said he had not stood out. He said that was not unusual. Monsters, he reminded the court, do not announce themselves. The family listened, learning again how thin the line is between reassurance and erasure. Cooperation had been a comfort once. Now it felt like camouflage. They watched the suspect's profile as he sat motionless, wondering how many versions of him they had known without knowing him at all. Grief has a way of rewriting memory, but so does evidence. They tried to hold both without dropping either. Midway through the trial, the prosecution introduced an exhibit that changed the room's temperature. Not because it was graphic, it was not, but because it was intimate. A personal item recovered years after the disappearance, its provenance carefully traced, its chain of custody meticulously documented. It had been found not far from the highway, in a place that had been searched before but not thoroughly enough, or perhaps too early, before weather and time had shifted the ground. The defense challenged the discovery, questioned the timing, the search methods, the possibility of secondary placement. The jury leaned forward, sensing the gravity. Objects do not lie, but they can be moved. Experts debated soil composition, plant growth, degradation rates. They spoke in probabilities and margins of error, the language of science that sounds precise until you listen closely. The prosecution argued that the item's condition aligned with a timeline consistent with their theory. The defense argued that alignment is not identity. Two things can look the same and not be the same thing. The judge allowed the testimony, cautioning the jury to weigh it carefully. Careful weighing is slow. Justice, the public prefers to believe, is fast. Outside, the town's patience wore thin. Solved or not solved, people wanted an ending they could live with. Social media amplified fragments, turning testimony into slogans. The suspect's past was mined for meaning, old photos recirculated, expressions analyzed as if they could confess. The family withdrew further, learning the cost of proximity to a story that belongs to everyone and no one at once. As the defense prepared its case, it brought forward alternative narratives, not to prove them but to seed doubt. A trucker who had been on the road that night, his logs incomplete. A transient whose presence near the highway had been noted and dismissed. A local feud that had burned hot and then vanished from records. Each possibility was presented briefly, then set aside. A reminder that absence of proof is not proof of absence. The prosecution objected to relevance. The judge allowed some, excluded others. The jury watched the pruning, understanding that truth in court is curated. The suspect took the stand late in the week, a decision that carried risk no matter the outcome. He spoke calmly, answering questions with practiced restraint. He denied involvement. He explained his movements. He acknowledged inconsistencies without conceding guilt. Under cross-examination, his composure wavered, just slightly, enough to be noticed, but not enough to be decisive. The prosecution pressed on timelines, on details that blurred under pressure. The defense redirected, reframing hesitation as human, memory as fallible. The jury took notes. Notes would not decide this alone. When court adjourned that day, the hallway buzzed with interpretation. Did you see his hands? Did you hear the pause? Did you notice how he avoided the family's eyes? Observations piled up, each carrying the weight of expectation. The case was becoming a mirror, reflecting back whatever the observer brought to it. That is the danger zone for any cold case that re-enters the light. In the quiet hours after midnight, investigators revisited the evidence in their own minds, not because they doubted it, but because doubt is a professional obligation. They traced the chain again, checked the margins, imagined the defense's closing arguments before they were spoken. They knew that an arrest can collapse under scrutiny as easily as it can endure it. They also knew that doing nothing had been its own verdict for 20 years. The highway, indifferent as ever, carried on. Trucks thundered past the spot where the sedan had been found, their lights sweeping the shoulder in arcs that revealed nothing new. Somewhere, a dog barked again and then went quiet, the sound passing into memory before it could become evidence. The night did not offer commentary. It never does. As the trial approached its final phase, the judge reminded the jury of their charge, to decide not what might have happened, but what had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Reasonable is a slippery word. It flexes to accommodate fear and hope alike. The family braced themselves for whatever shape it would take. Because by now, Everyone understood that this case was not just about whether the past could be solved, but about whether the present could live with the answer. An arrest had promised clarity. What it delivered was a confrontation with uncertainty sharpened by time. The cold case had warmed under scrutiny, but warmth does not guarantee light. Sometimes it only makes the shadows move. Closing arguments arrived without ceremony, as if the case itself resisted the idea of an ending, and the courtroom sensed it, the air tightening not with anticipation but with caution. The prosecution spoke first, their voices measured, their slides restrained, reminding the jury that the story they had heard was not a collection of coincidences but a convergence, that cold cases are not resurrected on a whim but on accumulation. They traced the arc from that silent stretch of highway to the lab reports and witness recollections, insisting that time had not diluted the truth, but clarified it, that patience had allowed the noise to fall away. They acknowledged the gaps without apologizing for them. No case, they said, is perfect. This one was persistent. They returned to the night itself, to the decisions that placed the victim on that road and the suspect within reach. They emphasized access, familiarity, the ease with which trust can be exploited when routines are known. They asked the jury to imagine how quickly ordinary interactions can turn irreversible, how a stop measured in seconds can cascade into absence. The arrest, they argued, was not an act of desperation but of discipline, the end point of years spent waiting for science to catch up with suspicion. Justice, delayed, was still justice. The defense rose with a different posture, less declarative, more invitational. They spoke of humility, of the danger of mistaking progress for certainty. They reminded the jury that the phrase cold case carries not only promise but peril, that reopening the past risks reshaping it to fit the tools of the present. They returned to the evidence with a scalpel, isolating each piece, questioning its independence, its susceptibility to interpretation. They argued that convergence can be manufactured by selection, that once a theory takes hold, everything else is drawn toward it like iron filings to a magnet. They spoke of the investigation's early chaos, of the roads not taken, the witnesses not pursued, the evidence not prioritized when memories were fresh and landscapes unaltered. They did not accuse, they contextualized. Mistakes, they suggested, do not disqualify an investigation, but they should temper confidence. They asked the jury to sit with discomfort, to resist the urge to resolve a story simply because it has gone on too long. Reasonable doubt, they said, is not an insult to the victim. It is a safeguard for the living. The judge's instructions were clinical, delivered with the gravity of repetition. Burden of proof. Presumption of innocence. The difference between suspicion and certainty. The jury listened, knowing that the words would soon be theirs to translate into consequence. When they filed out to deliberate, the courtroom exhaled, a collective release that felt premature. Deliberations began with silence, the kind that tests resolve. Jurors avoided eye contact at first, arranging notes, straightening papers, delaying the moment when opinions must surface. When they did, they arrived cautiously, framed as questions rather than declarations. How much weight should the genetic evidence carry? What to make of memories reshaped by time? Whether access and opportunity, when combined with science, crossed the threshold from plausible to proven. Hours passed. Coffee cooled. The case refused to simplify. Outside, the town waited with a patience learned the hard way. Reporters filled airtime with analysis, replaying clips, inviting experts to speculate without deciding. The family waited too, in a room they had come to know intimately, rehearsing outcomes they had promised themselves they would not imagine. Hope is dangerous at this stage. So is despair. They chose neutrality and found it exhausting. The jury sent notes to the judge, requests for clarification that revealed their fault lines. They asked to review exhibits again, to hear testimony replayed, to see timelines aligned one more time. Each request tightened the knot in the hallway, where whispers interpreted diligence as doubt or vice versa. The suspect waited, his posture unchanged, as if stillness could influence the outcome. When the jury returned the first time, it was not with a verdict but with a question that landed like a stone. They were divided. The judge instructed them to continue, reminding them of their duty to deliberate honestly and thoroughly. They filed back out, the door closing with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. Inside the jury room, the debate sharpened. Some jurors spoke of the elegance of the prosecution's narrative, the way disparate elements aligned under scrutiny. Others spoke of unease, of the feeling that alignment does not equal inevitability. They wrestled with the notion of beyond reasonable doubt, stretching it, compressing it, testing its elasticity. They acknowledged the family's pain without allowing it to tip the scale. They returned again and again to the same exhibits, as if repetition might yield revelation. Night fell. The courthouse lights burned on. The highway outside Waco carried traffic indifferent to the drama unfolding nearby. Somewhere, a dog barked and then went quiet, the sound threading through the night as it always had. The case lingered in the balance, suspended between resolution and continuation. When the jury emerged again, the room stilled. This time, the verdict was ready, or so it appeared. The clerk read the words with practiced neutrality, each syllable weighted by anticipation. The reaction was not explosive. It was subdued, fractured. Some exhaled. Some stiffened. The family absorbed the outcome with expressions that resisted easy interpretation. The suspect closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, as if checking whether the room was still there. The verdict did not end the conversation. It rarely does in a case like this. Appeals were discussed before the room even emptied. Analysts spoke of grounds and precedents, of how cold cases fare under appellate scrutiny. The prosecution emphasized vindication. The defense emphasized the path ahead. Both spoke the language of process, knowing that process is how institutions manage uncertainty. Outside, the cameras captured reactions stripped of context. Headlines formed in real time, some definitive, others hedged. Solved, they said. Or nearly. Or contested. The town absorbed the news and found that it fit awkwardly, like a coat borrowed from someone else. Relief arrived in pockets. Doubt lingered in corners. The family returned home with the verdict folded into their lives, uncertain how to place it among the years of waiting. Justice, if that is what this was, felt procedural rather than transformative. It answered some questions and sharpened others. They learned that an ending in court does not guarantee an ending in the heart. As the courthouse emptied and the night reclaimed the space, the case settled into a new phase, no longer frozen, but not at rest. Cold cases, even when declared solved, have a way of persisting, their heat uneven, their shadows mobile. The highway remained, the trees whispered in the wind, and the memory of that night in 2001 continued to move through the present, reminding anyone who listened that resolution is not the same as peace, and that some stories, once reopened, never truly close. The days after the verdict unfolded with a strange quiet, the kind that follows a storm not because the air is cleared, but because everyone is listening for what comes next. The courthouse emptied, the cameras packed up, and the town tried on the word closure like a garment that didn't quite fit. Some wore it proudly, relieved to have an answer after years of suspended disbelief. Others found it itchy, restrictive, a label that demanded acceptance before it earned trust. The case had moved from mystery to judgment, but the transition did not feel like a clean break. It felt like a hinge. In legal terms, the machinery shifted immediately. Motions were filed. Deadlines set. Transcripts ordered. The defense spoke of appeal not as a threat, but as an inevitability, a continuation rather than a reversal. They cited issues raised during trial, evidentiary thresholds, jury instructions that could be parsed and reparsed. The prosecution responded with confidence measured enough to sound professional, reminding anyone who would listen that verdicts are built to endure scrutiny. Both sides knew that cold cases, by their nature, invite a second look even after the gavel falls. Time cuts both ways. The family entered a phase they had not prepared for, because no one prepares for the after of justice. Their phones rang less often now. The reporters moved on. Friends asked careful questions and offered careful congratulations, as if relief were something to be earned publicly. In private, the family sorted through feelings that refused to line up: gratitude toward the investigators, anger at the years lost, unease about details that still didn't align. They learned that certainty can coexist with doubt, that believing the verdict does not require silencing every question. It requires living with them. The suspect, now a convicted man, was transferred quietly, the logistics handled without spectacle. His name lingered in the town longer than his presence ever had, attached now to headlines and arguments, to debates about justice delayed and justice delivered. Those who had known him revisited old interactions with a new lens, searching for signs they might have missed. Others resisted the impulse, insisting that hindsight is an unreliable witness. The truth, they discovered, did not ask to be believed by consensus. It asked to be carried individually. Investigators returned to their routines with a subtle recalibration. Some felt vindicated, their patience rewarded. Others felt the familiar itch of unfinished business, the professional instinct to double-check even when the work is done. They reviewed the file again, not because they expected to find something new, but because closure invites reflection. They considered the early days, the missed turns, the technology that had not yet arrived. They wondered how many other boxes in storage would one day demand the same attention, the same endurance. The highway outside Waco faded from the news cycle, but not from memory. Drivers continued to slow at the bend, unaware that their caution was inherited. The shoulder where the sedan had been found bore no marker now, the flowers removed, the fence repaired again. Nature resumed its quiet work, erasing footprints with rain and heat. The place did not announce its significance. It rarely does. Significance is assigned after the fact. As the appeal process took shape, experts weighed in with renewed energy. They dissected the trial with academic precision, arguing about standards and strategies, about whether modern forensic methods should be constrained by the limitations of their origins. Some praised the restraint shown by the court. Others warned of precedent, of the risk of overconfidence in techniques that feel definitive but are built on probability. The debate was not new. Cold cases have always been laboratories for the future of justice, testing how far the system can reach back without losing its balance. The family followed these discussions at a distance, learning which arguments mattered and which were noise. They learned the difference between legal sufficiency and emotional sufficiency. One answers a court, the other answers a life. They marked time in small ways now, anniversaries acknowledged quietly, routines re-established with care. Grief does not evaporate when a verdict arrives. It changes shape. It becomes something you carry without expecting it to set itself down. In town, the story persisted in fragments. A radio segment revisited the case months later, framed as a success story. A podcast promised fresh insights, packaging old interviews with new music. Listeners argued in comment sections about guilt and doubt, about whether justice had finally caught up or merely caught something. The case became content, then context, then cautionary tale. Each retelling sanded away nuance. The core remained stubbornly complex. The defense filed its appeal with language sharpened for the long game. They argued not innocence but procedure, not alternate truths but alternate thresholds. They focused on the genetic evidence, its interpretation, its presentation to the jury. They questioned the discovery of the personal item, the timing, the searches conducted years earlier. They suggested that the narrative had been allowed to outrun the safeguards designed to contain it. The prosecution responded with citations and confidence, emphasizing corroboration, chain of custody, judicial discretion. The dance resumed. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The case slipped into a quieter register, present but not dominant. Then came the first appellate ruling, narrow and technical, sending a ripple through those who still listened closely. It did not overturn. It did not affirm in full. It clarified. The court acknowledged the challenges inherent in cold cases, recognized the evolving nature of evidence, and upheld the verdict while leaving the door open for further review. The language was careful. The implications were not. The family received the news without ceremony. They had learned to measure reactions, to avoid peaks and valleys when the terrain ahead remained uneven. The ruling felt like a step, not an arrival. They wondered how many steps justice required before it could be called complete. They wondered whether completeness was even possible. The investigators marked the ruling with quiet relief. The work, they knew, was largely out of their hands now, residing in briefs and chambers far from the highway that had started it all. Still, the case remained theirs in a way that defied job descriptions. Cold cases attach themselves. They become reference points, lessons carried forward into new investigations, reminders of patience and humility. At night, the town settled into its rhythms. The highway hummed. Trucks passed. The dark retained its thickness. Somewhere, a dog barked and then went quiet, a sound that had become a motif without meaning, a reminder without instruction. The past did not announce itself. It lingered. The story, officially, had moved on. Unofficially, it continued to surface in conversations that began elsewhere and drifted back. In questions asked softly, without expectation of answer. In glances exchanged, when the road was mentioned. The verdict had drawn a line, but lines do not erase what lies on either side. They only mark it. Cold cases promise resolution. Sometimes they deliver a verdict. Sometimes they deliver endurance. This one delivered both, unevenly, leaving a town to negotiate the space between certainty and doubt, between justice as declared and justice as felt. The arrest had shocked the victim's family. The verdict had steadied the system. The after would test everyone else. Because long after the paperwork is filed and the headlines fade, what remains is the knowledge that time does not guarantee clarity, that answers can arrive without settling the questions that matter most. The case had warmed under scrutiny, then cooled again into a different shape, one that would persist not as an open mystery, but as an open memory, a reminder that some nights never fully release their grip, and some truths, once found, do not ask to be believed so much as lived with. The appeal did not arrive with drama. It arrived with paperwork, dense and methodical, the language of challenge stripped of emotion and sharpened to precision. In quiet offices far from the highway, judges read arguments that reduced years of waiting to numbered points and footnotes, parsing what had been said and what had been implied, what had been allowed and what had been assumed. The case entered a colder chamber now, where time moved differently, where urgency was replaced by deliberation and the past was examined through rules designed to protect the future. The town felt the shift even if it could not name it. The hum beneath daily life changed pitch. For the family, the appeal reopened doors they had just learned to close. Each filing brought the case back into focus, pulled it from the shelf where they had tentatively placed it, labeled unfinished but resting. They learned the rhythms of appellate calendars, the way months stretch without news and then compress into a single sentence that can change everything. They learned to read between lines written for lawyers, to hear what was not being said. Hope returned in smaller doses now, measured, diluted to avoid collapse. The defense's argument circled the same core with renewed insistence. They questioned the genetic evidence again, not its existence, but its framing, the way probability had been translated into certainty in the minds of jurors. They raised the specter of contamination not as an accusation but as a possibility, a reminder that evidence does not exist in a vacuum. They argued that the discovery of the personal item years later carried an evidentiary weight it had not earned, that context had been supplied retroactively. They spoke of cumulative effect, how pieces that wobble individually can feel stable when stacked. The prosecution responded with restraint that signaled confidence. They emphasized the trial court's discretion, the safeguards observed, the corroboration that insulated each piece from standing alone. They reminded the appellate judges that juries are entrusted to weigh evidence precisely because certainty is rare. Beyond reasonable doubt, they argued, does not mean beyond all doubt. It means sufficient confidence to act. The line between the two is thin, but the system depends on it holding. As briefs crossed paths, the case re-entered conversation in the town, quieter this time, more analytical. The heat of reaction had cooled into debate. People spoke less about guilt and innocence and more about process, about what it means to revisit the past with modern tools. Some worried about precedent, about how far back justice should reach. Others found comfort in the idea that time does not protect wrongdoing. The case became a reference, shorthand for a set of anxieties that extended beyond a single night in 2001. Investigators followed the appeal with professional interest and personal investment. They knew the record well enough to recite it, but appeals ask different questions. They wondered which parts of their work would be elevated, which minimized. They replayed moments in their minds, decisions made under constraints that no longer exist. They felt pride and defensiveness in equal measure. Cold cases do that. They bind identity to outcome. The highway remained unchanged, its significance now abstract, carried in documents rather than footsteps. Engineers repaved a section months later, unaware of the layers beneath. The shoulder where the sedan had been found disappeared under fresh asphalt, a practical act that felt symbolic to those who noticed. Progress does not ask permission. It moves forward, covering what it can. The appellate hearing itself was brief, anticlimactic to those expecting confrontation. Lawyers spoke within strict limits, interrupted by questions that cut to the marrow of their arguments. Judges asked about standards, about whether the trial court had abused its discretion, about how evolving science should be weighed against fixed rights. There were no speeches for the gallery, no moments designed for cameras. Justice at this level is quiet by design. When the ruling came, it arrived without warning, a document posted online before anyone had time to gather. The court affirmed most of the trial court's decisions, acknowledging the challenges inherent in cold cases while declining to substitute its judgment for that of the jury. One point was remanded for clarification, a technical matter that would require additional briefing. It was not an overturn. It was not a clean affirmation. It was a narrowing. The family read the ruling together, line by line, learning again how legal language can feel both precise and evasive. Affirmed felt heavy. Remanded felt ambiguous. They allowed themselves a brief exhale, then steadied. They had learned not to celebrate too early, not to mourn too deeply. The case had taught them that outcomes can change shape without changing direction. The defense announced its intention to continue, to pursue every avenue available. The prosecution acknowledged the remand and prepared to respond. The case entered another holding pattern, neither advancing nor retreating, suspended in procedural space. Time resumed its uneven pace. Public attention flickered and dimmed. New stories claimed the headlines. The cold case receded into the background again, known but not dominant. That was how it had survived for 20 years, in the margins. Those who remained engaged did so quietly, following filings, reading orders, discussing implications in small groups. The case no longer demanded belief. It demanded patience. In the family's home, life asserted itself in mundane ways. Meals cooked, birthdays marked, work continued. The absence that had defined so much of their time softened into a presence of its own, a companion that did not leave but no longer shouted. They learned that resolution, when it comes in pieces, must be assembled daily. The investigators closed the file in their offices, not permanently but symbolically, a recognition that their role had shifted. They turned to other cases, other nights, other roads. Still, when a new file landed on a desk labeled cold, they felt the echo of this one, the reminder that patience can be a form of courage and that certainty is always provisional. At night, the town settled. The highway hummed. The dark retained its thickness. Somewhere, a dog barked and then went quiet, the sound now less a clue than a refrain, marking time rather than place. The case lingered not as a question but as a condition, part of the town's vocabulary. Cold cases do not end cleanly. They taper. They fade into systems and schedules, into appellate calendars and institutional memory. They leave behind lessons rather than answers, caution rather than comfort. This one, born on a silent stretch of road in 2001, had traveled far without leaving that place. It had passed through labs and courtrooms and homes, changing shape with each passage. And as the appeal ground forward, as the law weighed itself against time, one truth settled in quietly, that solving a cold case does not restore the past. It rearranges the present. It asks communities and families and institutions to live with a version of certainty that will never feel complete, to accept that some nights, Once opened, do not close, they recede, leaving behind a chill that is no longer sharp enough to wound but never warm enough to forget. The remand narrowed the focus, but it did not narrow the unease. It asked a smaller question inside a larger one, inviting the court to explain itself rather than revisit the verdict, and in that invitation the case found new oxygen. Lawyers sharpened their language again, drafting arguments that treated nuance like leverage. The public barely noticed the shift, but those who had lived inside the case felt it immediately, the way you feel a change in weather before it announces itself. Cold cases teach you to listen for subtleties. The trial court responded in writing, clarifying the point the appellate judges had flagged, reaffirming the basis for admitting the contested evidence, laying out its reasoning with careful citations and a tone calibrated to withstand scrutiny. It read like a map drawn after the journey, routes justified, turns explained. The defense objected to the framing, arguing that explanation does not equal correction, that clarity cannot substitute for caution. The prosecution countered that the court had done exactly what it was asked to do, no more, no less. The exchange was civil, precise, relentless. For the family, this phase felt oddly abstract. The arguments now were about words, about standards, about how much discretion a judge may exercise when science advances faster than precedent. The night in 2001 receded further into the background, present only as a reference point, a date attached to doctrines. They missed the concreteness of earlier phases, the maps and photographs, the human faces. Abstraction offered fewer footholds for emotion. The town, meanwhile, negotiated its own relationship with the case's persistence. Some expressed fatigue, a desire for finality unencumbered by footnotes. Others took comfort in the system's willingness to pause and examine itself. The case became a touchstone in discussions about reform, cited in op-eds and panel talks, a local story elevated to a broader caution. Texas had seen this before, the way individual tragedies become templates for institutional reflection. Investigators watched from a distance, aware that their work was being interpreted now through layers of legal analysis. They recognized phrases from their reports embedded in briefs, reframed to serve arguments they could not control. It was a strange form of legacy, seeing the past repurposed in present tense. They reminded themselves that this, too, was part of the job, that truth in the system travels by adaptation. The highway received no such attention. It carried traffic without comment, the asphalt absorbing heat and light, the shoulder holding nothing but weeds and debris. The place had been stripped of its narrative function, returned to geography. Those who knew the story still felt a pull there, an involuntary slowing, a glance that lingered longer than necessary. Places remembered differently than people. They keep their secrets by indifference. The appellate court reviewed the trial court's clarification and moved with deliberate speed. The ruling that followed was concise, affirming the lower court's explanation and closing the loop the remand had opened. It was a legal punctuation mark, small but definitive. The verdict stood. The door narrowed further. Reactions were muted. The prosecution issued a statement emphasizing respect for the process and confidence in the outcome. The defense acknowledged the ruling and indicated it was evaluating next steps, language chosen to keep options alive without promising movement. The family read the words and set them aside, recognizing the pattern now, the rhythm of progress that never quite arrives. In the absence of procedural fireworks, the case settled into the background hum of the justice system, present in databases and citations, referenced occasionally by those who follow such things closely. The public moved on. New stories replaced old ones. The cold case became history rather than headline. Yet history has a way of resurfacing in unexpected forms. A law review article examined the case as an example of evolving forensic standards. A training seminar for detectives referenced it in a slide about patience and documentation. A podcast teased a retrospective, promising unheard angles, then delivered familiar terrain. Each appearance pulled the case back into the light briefly, then let it slip again. The family navigated these resurgences with practiced care. They learned when to engage and when to withdraw, when to correct the record, and when to let inaccuracies pass. They understood that control was limited, that stories acquire their own momentum. They focused on what they could shape: remembrance, advocacy, the quiet work of honoring a life reduced too often to a case number. The convicted man remained largely out of sight, his appeals constrained, his name occasionally resurfacing in legal summaries. Those who argued his innocence grew quieter as avenues narrowed, though doubt never disappeared entirely. Doubt rarely does. It adapts, becoming less public and more personal. In the town, the case's imprint softened, but did not vanish. It lived in the way people spoke about time, about patience, about the idea that answers can arrive late and still matter. It lived in the caution parents passed to children without naming its origin. It lived in the collective understanding that normal nights can fracture without warning. As years edged forward, the case approached a kind of stasis, not frozen, but settled, like sediment after a flood. The legal questions have been asked and answered as fully as the system allowed. What remained were the human questions, immune to rulings and deadlines. At night, the familiar sounds returned. The highway's hum, the wind in the trees. Somewhere, a dog barked and then went quiet, the sound now stripped of symbolism by repetition, just a marker of continuity. The case no longer demanded attention. It waited. Because cold cases, even when declared solved and affirmed and archived, do not exit cleanly. They persist in memory, in footnotes, in the spaces between certainty and acceptance. This one had traveled from silence to scrutiny and back again, leaving behind a trail of decisions that could be cited and a set of emotions that could not. And in that persistence lay its final lesson, not about guilt or innocence, but about endurance. About the way time tests stories and systems alike, revealing not only what happened, but how we choose to carry it forward once the shouting stops and the paperwork settles, once the road returns to being just a road and the night resumes its work of moving on. Time did what it always does after the system declares itself finished. It thinned the noise without erasing the echo. The case slid deeper into institutional memory, referenced more often by file number than by name, yet it never fully disappeared. It surfaced in moments of comparison, when another disappearance unsettled another town, when another stretch of road became shorthand for uncertainty. People would say, "Remember Texas 2001," and the room would understand what that meant without needing the details. Cold cases teach communities a private language. For the family, distance changed the weight of the days but not their direction. They learned to live alongside the verdict rather than inside it. The legal milestones had come and gone. What remained were ordinary choices that felt newly deliberate. Where to place photographs. How to answer questions that arrived without warning. Whether to attend events that framed the case as inspiration. They chose selectively, wary of narratives that promised healing through resolution. Healing, they knew now, does not arrive on a schedule. Anniversaries pass quietly. The dates circled on calendars more out of habit than necessity, a marker that required acknowledgement even when words failed. They visited the places that still felt connected, the neighborhood where she had lived, the diner she liked, the road they avoided for years and then finally drove again, slowly, windows down, the landscape unchanged and entirely different. Closure is not a door. It is a series of tolerable distances. In professional circles, the case gained a different kind of life. Conferences cited it as an example of late-stage evidence integration, of how patience and documentation can turn fragments into arguments. Some praised the restraint shown by investigators who waited for science rather than forcing conclusions. Others cautioned against narrative gravity, the way long open cases can pull ambiguous facts into alignment once momentum builds. The debate was respectful and unresolved. That, too, felt appropriate. New detectives heard the story secondhand, their first exposure mediated by slides and summaries rather than sleepless nights. They absorbed the lessons selectively. Preserve everything. Revisit assumptions. Document decisions, as if someone else will read them decades later. Cold cases do not forgive sloppiness. They do not reward speed. The file became a teaching tool, its edges smoothed by repetition, its pain abstracted into principle. The town experienced subtle shifts. Conversations about safety changed tone, less reactive, more reflective. The case had taught people that danger does not announce itself, that familiarity can be misleading. It had also taught them that waiting is sometimes part of justice, that answers can arrive after hope has been rationed thin. These lessons were not spoken aloud often. They lived in behavior, in choices made quietly. The highway, repaved and repurposed, carried on. New exits appeared. Old signage was replaced. Drivers unfamiliar with the story passed through without hesitation, their lives intersecting briefly with a place heavy with history they could not feel. Those who knew still felt the pull, an involuntary check of mirrors, a glance at the shoulder, the memory of a car left wrong. Geography does not remember. People do. Occasionally, a rumor surfaced online, a thread claiming new information, a shadow witness, a confession that never materialized. The family learned to ignore most of it. They had spent enough time chasing echoes. When something seemed credible, they listened, evaluated, and usually found it wanting. The case had taught them discernment the hard way. The convicted man's name appeared sporadically in updates about the system, transfers, administrative changes, the dull logistics of long sentences. There were no dramatic developments, no reversals to reignite debate. His story flattened into routine, which is how institutions signal that they consider a matter settled. Those who continued to doubt did so quietly now, their arguments refined but constrained. Doubt, like belief, matures with time. The family turned some of their energy outward, not to relitigate the past but to support others entering its shadow. They attended meetings. They answered letters. They offered practical advice to families at the beginning of waiting, words that did not promise outcomes, but acknowledged endurance. They avoided slogans. They spoke about patience and limits, about protecting oneself from hope that consumes rather than sustains. Their credibility came not from certainty, but from survival. Media revisited the case on round anniversaries, each retelling trying to justify its existence by promising a new angle. Sometimes the angle was technology. Sometimes it was psychology. Sometimes it was the question of whether justice delayed can ever be justice delivered. The family participated selectively, aware that silence can be misread and speech can be misused. They chose outlets that understood restraint, that left space for ambiguity. In these retellings, the night in 2001 grew mythic, simplified by repetition. Details blurred. Motifs hardened. The barking dog returned as symbol more often than fact. The road became destiny rather than setting. The family noticed these shifts and corrected some, let others go. Stories, once released, obey different rules. Cold cases become narratives because people need containers for uncertainty. The system, meanwhile, moved on, its attention pulled toward newer files, fresher absences. Yet the case lingered as a benchmark, cited when decisions demanded justification. Should we wait? Should we reopen? Should we trust this method? The answers were never automatic. They were informed by memory, by precedent, by the awareness that time changes not only evidence but expectations. Years later, a minor policy adjustment referenced the case obliquely, a footnote in a report about evidence retention and review cycles. No names were mentioned. The lesson had been absorbed into procedure, the highest compliment an institution can offer. The family learned about it from a friend, smiled briefly, and returned to their day. Impact, they had learned, does not require recognition. The town's relationship to the case softened further. New residents arrived with no knowledge of it, their questions oriented toward schools and taxes rather than history. Longtime residents told the story less often, not because it mattered less, but because it had found its place. Trauma that is integrated stops demanding constant narration. At night, the sounds remained familiar. The highway's hum, wind through trees. Somewhere, a dog barked and then went quiet, the sound no longer loaded with meaning, just a reminder that nights continue, indifferent to human milestones. The case had taught the town to listen differently, not for clues but for continuity. Cold cases promise a particular kind of drama, revelation after waiting, clarity after confusion. This one had delivered something more complicated. It offered an answer that held and a story that resisted closure. It showed that justice can function without resolving every question, that certainty can be partial and still consequential. It demanded that people live with the residue. For the family, the residue became manageable. Not light, not gone, but shaped. They learned that memory does not fade so much as reorganize, that grief can coexist with forward motion without betraying the past. They stopped measuring days by what was missing and began measuring them by what remained possible. And so the case settled into its final form, not an open wound and not a sealed scar, but a presence woven into the fabric of lives and systems. Texas 2001 became a reference rather than a headline, a reminder rather than a demand. The arrest had shocked the victim's family. The process had tested the town. Time had absorbed the rest. Because in the end, cold cases are less about the moment they are declared solved than about what follows. The long negotiation between memory and acceptance, between answers and the spaces they leave behind. This one did not end. It endured. And in that endurance, it left behind a quieter truth, that resolution is not a single event but a practice, repeated daily, under skies that look the same even when everything beneath them has changed. The years that followed did not announce themselves as an epilogue. They arrived disguised as normalcy, as routines reclaimed and silences learned. The case had slipped far enough from the headlines that its presence could now surprise people, surfacing unexpectedly in conversations that began elsewhere, at kitchen tables and gas stations, in classrooms where students asked how long justice should wait. Texas 2001 was no longer news. It was reference. It was shorthand for patience tested and answers complicated. The family noticed the change first in how people spoke to them. The careful condolences softened into quiet acknowledgments. Questions, when they came, were phrased less like inquiries and more like check-ins.
How are you doing now?
Now carried weight. It suggested a before and after, a line drawn by a verdict and reinforced by time. They answered honestly when they could, evasively when they needed to. They had learned that truth is not owed on demand. They reorganized their lives around what remained. Some rooms were redecorated, not to erase memory, but to make space for breath. Objects once too heavy to touch found new places, not hidden, not displayed, simply present. Grief matured into something quieter, less volatile, a constant companion that no longer insisted on being heard. The case had taught them endurance, but time taught them adaptation. In the broader community, the story settled into folklore stripped of urgency. The details became negotiable. People argued less about what happened and more about what it meant. Was it proof that justice eventually arrives, or proof that it arrives imperfectly? Was it a warning about complacency or a reassurance about persistence? The answers varied, reflecting the needs of the speaker more than the facts of the case.
Cold cases function that way.
They become mirrors. Institutions absorb the lessons more concretely. Evidence rooms were audited with renewed seriousness. Policies about rear-review cycles were refined. Training emphasized documentation not as bureaucracy, but as future testimony. The case was cited without being named, its influence diffused into procedure. That diffusion felt both satisfying and strange to those who had lived it firsthand. Impact without acknowledgement is a peculiar legacy. Occasionally, the family was invited to speak, to put a human face on abstract reforms. They chose carefully. They declined invitations that promised inspiration without nuance. They accepted those that allowed complexity, that acknowledged uncertainty without exploiting it. When they spoke, they avoided absolutes. They talked about waiting, about limits, about the cost of hope when it is demanded rather than chosen. Their restraint made people listen. The convicted man's trajectory flattened further into routine. Years passed without incident. Appeals narrowed to technicalities that rarely found traction. His name appeared in databases and reports, stripped of the narrative heft it once carried. This flattening unsettled some and reassured others. The system's ability to normalize outcomes is both its strength and its blind spot. Online, the case lived a different life. Forums archived arguments that no longer moved. New users stumbled upon old threads and reignited debates with the energy of discovery, only to find that the fire had burned down to embers. Veterans of the discussion watched with a mix of nostalgia and fatigue. They recognized the cycle. Every cold case attracts caretakers of doubt and belief alike. Over time, both thin. The highway continued its work. Traffic increased. Construction altered familiar approaches. What had once been a lonely stretch became ordinary infrastructure, absorbed into growth. The place where the sedan had been found was now unremarkable, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. For those who knew, that ordinariness felt like a test. Could meaning persist without markers? It did, quietly, carried by memory rather than signposts. On certain nights, when the air hung heavy and the dark felt dense again, people still thought of the case. Not because of news or anniversaries, but because something in the atmosphere echoed that earlier uncertainty. They listened more closely. They drove a little slower. Trauma does not require reminders. It waits for resonance. The family noticed that memory shifted in texture over time. Early recollections had been sharp, edged with urgency. Later ones were smoother, less demanding. Stories about her became less about the night she vanished and more about the way she laughed, the habits she had, the plans she made. This shift felt like progress, though it arrived without ceremony. It did not mean forgetting. It meant rebalancing. In schools and community groups, the case was occasionally discussed as an example of civic responsibility. Report something unusual. Preserve information. Trust but verify. The lessons were practical, stripped of melodrama. That practicality honored the case more than any dramatic retelling ever could. It placed the story back where it belonged, among ordinary people making choices without knowing their future weight. The justice system, for its part, continued to cite the case in quiet ways. A footnote here, a training module there, a benchmark invoked when someone asked whether reopening a file was worth the effort. The answer was never automatic. It depended on evidence, on resources, on judgment. The case had not simplified those decisions. It had made them heavier. As the years layered on, the case acquired a patina of inevitability. Not because the outcome felt predestined, but because it had survived scrutiny long enough to feel stable. Stability is not truth. It is endurance. The distinction mattered to those who still paid attention. The family learned to mark time without reference to the case. They celebrated milestones unrelated to loss. They allowed joy without apology. When sadness arrived, they acknowledged it without alarm. The case no longer dictated the terms of their lives. It occupied a room, not the whole house. In the town, new stories replaced old ones. New mysteries demanded attention. The cold case receded further, its edges softened by distance. Yet it remained available, ready to be recalled when needed, a reminder of what patience can achieve and what it cannot guarantee. At night, the familiar sounds persisted. The highway's hum, the wind. Somewhere, a dog barked and then went quiet, the sound now entirely ordinary, stripped of narrative, a reminder that life continues without commentary. The case had taught people to hear such sounds without attaching meaning, to let nights be nights again. Texas, 2001 did not resolve into a moral. It resisted that simplification. It became something more useful and less satisfying, a lived example of complexity, of how answers can arrive without silencing questions, of how systems can function imperfectly and still matter, of how families can endure without being defined solely by what they lost. The arrest had once shocked the victim's family. The years that followed did something quieter. They taught everyone involved how to live with the shock after it fades, how to carry a truth that never fully settles, how to accept that some stories end not with certainty, but with continuity, moving forward under skies that look unchanged even as the ground beneath them shifts. Time did not close the file, so much as it taught people how to keep it open without bleeding. By the time the case reached what some called its later years, the mechanics of attention had changed. News cycles accelerated. Outrage shortened its fuse. Stories had to scream to be heard, and Texas, 2001 no longer screamed. It breathed. It lingered. It existed in the background like a low-frequency hum that only some could still detect. For investigators who had lived with the case, retirement arrived with a peculiar weight. Boxes were handed over. Passwords reset. Institutional memory transferred imperfectly, like a story told secondhand. They left behind notes written for people they would never meet, reminders that context matters as much as content. They worried about what would be lost in translation. Every cold case is vulnerable to the erosion of detail, the quiet slipping away of why something mattered in the first place. New eyes occasionally landed on old evidence, drawn not by mandate, but by curiosity. A junior analyst noticed a pattern in timelines that had once seemed incidental. A technician revisited a method now outdated, comparing it against current standards, not expecting reversal, but seeking reassurance. These moments did not promise revelation. They promised care. Care became the case's most reliable companion. The family's relationship to the system evolved again. They were no longer waiting for action. They were waiting for quiet. Requests for interviews tapered off. Invitations arrived less frequently, and when they did, they felt optional rather than urgent. This shift was both relief and loss. Being needed had given shape to grief. Being left alone required a different kind of strength. They developed rituals unconnected to anniversaries. Small, deliberate acts of remembrance that did not ask the world to stop. A meal prepared a certain way. A song allowed to play all the way through. These gestures honored continuity over spectacle. They did not perform closure. They practiced presence. In the community, a generation grew up knowing the case only as a reference point. They learned about it the way one learns about a storm that happened before memory begins. The facts were recited, the impact acknowledged, the emotional temperature cooler. This generational distance changed the conversation. Questions became less accusatory and more analytical. What would we do differently now? What did this teach us? The case matured into curriculum. The legal record hardened. Appeals exhausted their pathways. Language once contested settled into precedent. The words used to describe what happened became standardized, resistant to interpretation. This rigidity was necessary for function, but it carried a cost. Language that cannot bend struggles to capture lived experience. The family felt this acutely. Their reality had never been neat. The record insisted otherwise. Online, the case experienced brief resurgences tied to algorithms rather than events. A documentary clip went viral. A podcast episode resurfaced. Attention spiked and fell away again, a digital tide that left little behind. Comment sections filled with certainty from people who had arrived late and would leave early. The family learned to look away. Engagement no longer felt like participation. It felt like exposure. The place itself continued to change. What had once been empty land gained development. Lights replaced darkness. Signage appeared where there had been none. Progress altered the landscape without consulting memory. Some found this comforting. Others found it unsettling. Both reactions were valid. Places hold stories whether or not they advertise them. For those still working the case in any capacity, the challenge shifted from discovery to stewardship. How to preserve integrity without freezing inquiry. How to protect evidence while allowing for reevaluation. How to acknowledge resolution without dismissing doubt. These questions did not have answers that fit into policy manuals. They required judgment, patience, humility. The convicted man aged. His presence in the system became routine. Annual reviews noted compliance, behavior, predictability. He existed now as data points and checkboxes. The extraordinary had become administrative. This transformation disturbed some who feared it implied erasure of harm. Others saw it as evidence of stability. Both interpretations coexisted without reconciliation. The family noticed that public reactions softened over time. People no longer flinched when the case was mentioned. They nodded. They expressed sympathy, without urgency. This normalization was perhaps the strangest phase. It suggested acceptance without understanding. It allowed life to proceed. It also risked forgetting why the case had mattered so much in the first place. They guarded against that forgetting in their own way. Not through campaigns or speeches, but through fidelity to truth as they understood it. They corrected small errors when they heard them. They resisted sensational retellings. They refused to let the story be simplified into a cautionary tale with a clean moral. Complexity was not a flaw. It was the point. Professionals who studied cold cases cited Texas 2001 as an example of endurance rather than triumph. They spoke about resource allocation, about the psychological toll on investigators and families, about the long arc of accountability. The case was useful not because it ended, but because of how it unfolded. Its value lay in process. As the years pressed on, the emotional charge diffused further. The sharp edges dulled. What remained was a steady awareness that justice, once delivered, does not echo forever. It settles. It integrates. It becomes part of the landscape, like the highway that continued to carry people past the place where questions had once clustered thickest. On quiet evenings, when the air felt heavy again, some still thought about what could never be fully known. Not with anger, with curiosity tempered by acceptance. They understood now that answers are not the same as understanding, and understanding is not the same as peace. Texas 2001 lived on in this space between outcomes and meaning, between records and memories, between what could be proven and what could be felt. It asked little now. It demanded no attention. It simply existed, a reminder that even when a cold case is declared solved, its temperature never fully returns to normal. In the end, the case did not conclude with a sound. There was no final knock, no closing statement that carried the weight people expect from endings. It ended the way long stories often do, by thinning out, by becoming less insistent, by allowing life to speak louder than memory, without ever silencing it. Texas 2001 drifted into that quiet territory where resolution exists on paper, but meaning continues to negotiate its terms. Those closest to it learned that closure is a word used mostly by people standing at a distance. From the inside, there was only accommodation. The family did not wake up one morning free of the past. They woke up practiced in carrying it. The weight changed, redistributed over years of repetition, until it no longer crushed but pressed, a constant reminder of endurance rather than loss alone. They spoke less about the case and more about living, about work and weather and plans that extended further into the future than they once dared. When the past surfaced, as it inevitably did, it no longer hijacked the room. It sat quietly at the edge of conversation, acknowledged and allowed, no longer demanding tribute. This was not forgetting. It was integration. The justice system moved on as systems must. New cases arrived. New urgencies demanded attention. Files were opened with the confidence that procedures had improved, that lessons had been learned. And in subtle ways they had. Evidence was handled with more care. Timelines were documented with more precision. Questions were asked earlier, harder. Texas 2001 lived on in these habits, invisible but influential. For investigators who remained, the case became a private reference point. When doubt crept in on other files, they remembered the years of waiting, the cost of delay, the danger of assumption. The memory did not paralyze them. It sharpened them. Cold cases, when treated with respect, do that. They teach restraint. They demand humility. Public memory continued its slow fade, but not into nothing. The case settled into archives and databases, into lectures and footnotes, into the quiet confidence that something difficult had been faced and not abandoned. It was no longer sensational. It was instructive. That transition felt right, even if it lacked drama. The landscape bore no visible scars. The highway flowed. The town expanded. New lights cut into darkness that once felt absolute. Visitors passed through unaware, unburdened by context. Those who knew allowed this ignorance without resentment. Not every place needs to remember everything all the time. Survival requires selectivity. And yet, certain nights still carried an echo, a particular stillness, a stretch of road where the air felt heavier than it should. In those moments, Memory resurfaced without invitation. Not to accuse. Not to demand. Simply to remind. Trauma does not ask permission. It waits for quiet. The name of the victim was spoken less often in public, but more accurately in private. Stories about her shifted fully into the present tense of memory rather than the past tense of tragedy. She was remembered for her humor, her stubbornness, her ordinary habits that now felt precious. The case had once reduced her to a headline. Time restored her complexity. As for the declaration that the cold case was solved, it aged into a technical truth rather than an emotional one. It satisfied legal requirements. It closed procedural loops. It did not answer every question, nor did it claim to. People learned to live with that gap. Certainty is not a prerequisite for continuation. Texas 2001 became a quiet testament to something uncomfortable but real, that justice can arrive late, incomplete, and still matter. That answers can coexist with doubt. That endings do not erase what came before them. They simply change how it is carried. The case no longer haunted the town the way it once did. It lingered instead, like a shadow at dusk, visible only if you looked for it. Most days, people didn't. And that was okay. Life moved forward not because the past was resolved, but because it had been acknowledged enough to release its grip. There was no final line drawn under the story. No definitive moral stamped at the bottom of the page. Just a long, uneven journey that left behind altered people, altered systems, altered expectations. A cold case that warmed slightly with time, but never fully returned to room temperature. And somewhere between memory and record, between what was proven and what was felt, the case remained, quiet now, no longer demanding to be heard, but impossible to completely forget. A reminder that some truths do not conclude, they endure, carried forward in the lives of those who learned how to keep going after the noise stopped. The story did not ask for another chapter, but time has a way of adding one anyway. Not to resolve, not to explain, but to observe what happens after attention fades completely. When the microphones are gone, when the experts stop talking, when even memory loses its edge. Texas 2001 entered that phase quietly, without ceremony, slipping into the background of a world that had learned to live alongside it. Years passed in which nothing happened, and that nothing was its own kind of event. No new filings. No late-night calls. No rumors rising fast enough to trouble the surface. For some, the absence felt like relief. For others, it felt like risk. Silence can mean peace, or it can mean neglect. The difference depends on who is listening. Those who still carried the case internally became fewer. A detective here, a clerk there, a family member who never fully disengaged. Their vigilance was not obsessive. It was habitual. A glance at a database update. A pause when a similar case crossed the desk. A moment of attention given without expectation. This was how the case survived without spectacle. The family learned to recognize when memory resurfaced for reasons unrelated to anniversaries or headlines. It appeared in dreams that made no sense, in sudden associations triggered by voices or places, in the inexplicable heaviness of certain afternoons. These moments no longer frightened them. They had learned the rhythm. Memory arrives. Memory leaves. Life continues in between. They stopped correcting every misconception they heard. Not out of fatigue, but discernment. Some errors mattered. Others did not. They chose their interventions carefully, understanding that control over narrative diminishes with time. Letting go of that control was not surrender. It was conservation of energy. In academic circles, the case occasionally resurfaced as a data point. Charts and timelines abstracted the lived experience into variables and outcomes. Researchers debated efficacy, probability, margin of error. Their work was valuable. It also felt distant. Numbers could explain process, but they could not replicate weight. Those who had lived it understood that both perspectives were necessary, and neither was complete. The legal record remained unchanged, but interpretation continued to evolve. What once seemed definitive now felt contextual. What had been considered best practice became outdated. This evolution did not undermine the case. It reframed it. Justice is not static. It reflects the era that delivers it, and it ages along with that era's assumptions. The convicted man's existence receded further into institutional routine. He became part of a system designed to absorb individuals into categories. This absorption was efficient, almost merciful in its predictability. It also raised uncomfortable questions about how quickly the extraordinary becomes ordinary once processed by bureaucracy. The harm did not diminish. Its visibility did. The place where it all began became increasingly anonymous. Development erased landmarks that had once anchored memory. The terrain smoothed itself into neutrality. For newcomers, there was nothing to see. For those who knew, there was nothing to point at. Memory had lost its coordinates. It lived now without geography. And still, the case lingered in language. In the way people used the phrase cold case solved with caution. In the pauses that followed when someone mentioned long-delayed arrests. In the collective understanding that answers can arrive too late to feel like rescue, but early enough to matter. Texas, 2001 had recalibrated expectations. On rare occasions, someone would ask the family if they believed everything had been answered. The question was never hostile. It was curious, almost philosophical. They answered honestly. They believed what had been proven. They questioned what remained ambiguous. They accepted that belief and doubt are not opposites. They are companions. The community no longer gathered around the story, but it had absorbed its lessons. People noticed small things more often. They reported what fell off. They understood that time can be both enemy and ally. This awareness did not come from fear. It came from experience. As the decades stretched on, Texas 2001 became less about a single event and more about a span of time. A period when uncertainty dominated, when patience was demanded without guarantee, when truth emerged slowly and imperfectly. That span left its mark, not as trauma alone, but as perspective. There was no final revelation waiting just beyond the horizon. No hidden key poised to unlock everything. Those who hoped for that eventually learned a quieter truth. Some stories do not culminate. They disperse. They leave traces rather than conclusions. And so the case remained where it had settled long ago, between solved and understood, between documented and felt. It no longer disrupted daily life. It informed it subtly, like weather patterns remembered long after the storm has passed. Texas 2001 did not end with certainty. It ended with continuity, with people who learned how to live in the presence of unanswered questions, with systems that adjusted without claiming perfection, with a community that carried forward not a headline, but an awareness. The cold case, declared solved, continued to exist in its quiet afterlife, not as a mystery demanding attention, but as an echo reminding those who listened that time does not erase complexity. It reveals how well we learn to live along.